I mean, I kind of fell into it. I worked in development at Paramount at MTV Films and got laid off, as a rite of passage working at a studio. I was like 20 years old, and I was not gonna go home without another job. And the only job I could get at the time was at Paramount, working for the head of digital mastering. And I had known nothing about post or digital mastering, and it was right on the forefront of change when digital cinema was still being created, and we were working on creating digital cinema spec, and we were still shooting on 35 and transitioning into doing film scans in DI. And I just really liked working with the cinematographers. I got a chance to meet Storaro. I met Laszlo before he passed, and just really got to go to the ASC meetings and just kind of fell in love with that process. And I make a lot of short films. I work with a lot of filmmakers, and I felt that the thing that no one really had when you're doing shorts or when you're working on this is a post guy. Someone that understands sound, they understand color, how you're going to integrate visual effects. So by nature, I kind of fell into that pseudo role and kind of filled that void for my crew. And then ultimately, I worked at Paramount for about 10 years in distribution. But I worked on the servicing end, so I worked hand in hand with post-production to get all the assets and make all the films and get them in the theaters. And I worked with the filmmakers really closely. And then I left and I work at Amblin Entertainment now for the head of post. And that's how I fell onto Ghost in the Shell. There's two parts of filmmaking, I think, now, is the business entity of it and the creative part. And I think they've really kind of merged together with the way the studio system is now. And so my job as a post super is I have to overlook the budget and I have to work with the studio. But I work for the filmmakers. Regardless if I'm working at the studio at the time, I want to make sure the filmmakers get their vision to screen and they don't feel compromised. So it's always a fine, delicate kind of dance for me to continue to stay on target with where I am on budget, which is extremely important, and hit my deadlines, but also make sure that the trust is there with my filmmakers so they're not compromising what they want to put on the screen. And I've kind of built my reputation on being that guy. It's how my boss was Paul Thomas Anderson's post super, and he runs Amblin now, and he kind of takes it in that regard too, is he wants to make sure he supports the filmmakers. I mean, they greenlit this movie with a very aggressive post schedule in mind, with a very visual effects heavy movie. And, going into it with a very aggressive schedule, you're gonna have to really hit every benchmark. There's no downtime to really find your way. You're always working for something. And when you're working on a movie that had two studios, you had Paramount and you had DreamWorks with, the same interest, but also needed to get everyone's voice and opinion in, it becomes a race. And we were finishing this movie really, really late. Visual effects were coming in really late because we were designing shots as we were going. The cut was still being formed. We were doing reshoots later in the process. And my job is to keep the editors moving and work with John Dykstra and Jess Hall at the DI, and then also feed sound. And for sound, which was really interesting, we were doing the sound mix when we didn't have a locked cut, and visual effects were still coming in. So I would have to work really closely with John to lock animation so that the sound would fall in line. I print mastered sound before I finished the DI on this film, which is not a suggested way to do anything in terms of that. So we kind of had to develop workflow around our schedule to make sure we weren't compromising on anything, but we had to be very kind of careful about how we proceeded because it was a hard finish on this one. Well, principal photography was shot in New Zealand with Park Road, and they did all the dailies there. And then we set a very complex shola, which Jess talked about, which carried us through post. We previewed with it, we screened with it, everyone became very familiar with the look. When we went to shoot some additional scenes, we shot in LA with a different DIT, with trying to use the same shola, but it became a thing, and we kicked some shots back because they weren't completely matching the way that Jess wanted them to be. He had a very, very set idea about visually how everything should look. And when you're working with a different crew or you have different camera equipment and just different setup, you're going to inherently run into that. So we were very careful kind of moving forward, and Mike Hatzer, our colorist at Technicolor, did a really great job kind of taking that LUT and expanding on it and really putting it into the space that we wanted to do it. But it was a definite thing because Rupert is a visual director. He sees everything in a very visual medium. So to make sure that we were doing everything in the sense that he saw something, it wouldn't bump for him. And that was, and our entire workflow was built around the visual aesthetic, and then also sound was extremely important for him, which played an equally yeah, I mean the sound, I mean the movie itself, the background, the photography plays almost its own character. The cityscape, everything. I think they kind of built this world that is its own character in itself. And sound was going to play a very, very important part, whether it was the music, whether it was the sounds of the thermoptic suit. And our supervisors, Per Hallberg and Karen Landers, did an amazing job designing these worlds. And Rupert came in with a lot of really great, complex ideas. And to put that to picture when picture was still being worked on too was extremely difficult. We went through a lot of just different iterations and design elements to just get us there. And being on the stage on this one, while we had a decent schedule, we never felt like we could get ahead of it because we were always working towards something. We always felt like the minute we got ahead, we took 2 steps back because other things started to come up. Yeah, I think, having the opportunity to work with people like Jess and John Dykstra and Rupert was extremely rare to have such a collaborative group with such an experience, and everyone kind of came from a different walk of life. And I think when you look at the visuals we were able to put to screen and the sound and, Andy Nelson mixing, I think it really came together. So, yeah.